Hello, I am Bear Wiseman, and welcome back to Gathering of Geeks. Uh, this month I'm really excited that I've finally gone overseas to North America, back where I'm originally from. I have John Mondelli, aka John Sprocket. You might know him from the Cog Is Dead. And, well, I would find it really unusual if you would not consider yourself a geek.
Oh yeah, I 100% consider myself a geek for sure.
Well, we all know that I love geeks, so the main thing that I've always wanted to ask someone, and I feel like you might be the best expert on this, is what's the main big pull of steampunk? Because I've always thought there's a really cool aesthetic, but it kind of hits both the sci-fi and the fantasy side of things, and yeah, I've always just found it really interesting, but I've never quite gotten into it myself.
Yeah, I think the pull is different for different people. For me, what really drew me was the aesthetic more than anything. I think I had always been aware of things that had a steampunk aesthetic, even though I didn't know the term at the time, such as movies like Wild Wild West or anything that sort of had a retro futuristic sci-fi style to them. And around the time we were starting the band, we didn't have a steampunk theme. We just were starting a band for fun. And uh, while I was searching for ideas for customizing guitars, because I wanted to modify one of my guitars to just have a unique look, I found some steampunk guitars online and showed them to our bass player Chris, and he knew about steampunk and introduced me to that. So once I found out about steampunk, I just started looking more and more for steampunk guitar ideas, and then I found the band Abney Park, who is a pretty well-known steampunk band. And when I realized that steampunk bands could even be a thing, I thought that just seems like such a fun style to apply, because we could have the steampunk costumes and all of our instruments could be made out with this mechanical look. So that's really what drew me, was solely the look of it. I actually haven't seen a lot of steampunk films or read a lot of steampunk fiction. Um, I've written the songs that are sort of steampunk fiction, but yeah, it's for me been very visual. I love the look of a steampunk world.
I love that. And immediately, one of the songs that always comes to mind that you've written was I'm trying to think, Can You Help Me? Which, just as I listened to it, always felt like someone kind of going through town, getting their ass kicked, and then needing to have a limb replaced. And it always it created such a vivid scene in my head that I thought, oh, that is actually really cool.
Well, thank you for such a dark song.
Yeah, indeed. Also, just a little bit of positivity breeding positivity in the message too, which I always love. But uh,
Thank
it's
you.
very cool because I love this idea that like what kind of stories can you tell within a steampunk world? It's I still don't really know quite what that flavor is. Does it lean more to the low tech, high tech, combo tech? It fascinates me.
And it could really go any direction. And sort of the fun of the style, or the I guess the theme and general motif of the Cog Is Dead that we've established for ourselves is we are time travelers who have been influenced by the music of all the different eras that we visited. Um, so it allows for lots of different musical styles to be done, and then steampunk being a sort of a division of science fiction and Victorian era fiction, um, allows for all sorts of different storytelling in different worlds. So when writing the songs, every time I write a song, it's either coming up with something within a different world, like it may not all take place within the same universe, but it could all, they're all different steampunk stories. That's why the first album we released was called Steam Powered Stories, because they were just sort of a collection of songs that told stories about different people set in steampunk worlds. And so, yeah, you could really take it any direction you want. And with the first album, I know I tried to incorporate a lot of the common steampunk tropes, airships, time travel, robots, submarines, just a lot of those things that you see very, very commonplace, giant factories, gears, machinery, clocks. Um, as the years have gone on, it's gotten a little more difficult to not be too repetitive and try different things. So I keep trying to branch out while still sort of keeping things on track within the steampunk theme, but also not making things feel stale and too repetitive. If you do the same thing too much, it begins to get old.
Yeah. That's that's always kind of the risk, I suppose, when you have a sort of niche theme. If you take in mind, for example, like a heavy metal band Ailstorm with a pirate theme, they I think their first few albums were pretty kind of like yo ho yar, like, or quite kind of typical of what you'd expect from pirate metal to be. But nowadays they've gotten a little bit goofier and sillier, I suppose. People tend to have certain expectations, and if you get bored of what you're doing, then you've got to find some way to keep it fun. So I imagine with when you have to stick
Absolutely.
to yeah, that certain niche, then there's a fine balance to uphold after a while as to how can you still keep this fun and interesting.
Yep. Yeah, I haven't followed Ailstorm closely, but what I've heard of their music, I've always loved. Pirate metal is a really fun combination of two things, kind of like the way steampunk takes. I've always said, like, the beauty and the beast. You've got the beauty of Victorian fashion and architecture and craftsmanship fused with this raw, exposed gears and mechanical, kind of seeing the inner workings of things on the outside. And so you get the beauty and elegance with the gritty mechanical side. Uh, Pirate metal, I guess you could say they're both kind of aggressive things, but they work so well together.
Yeah, you can get a great song like Nancy the Tavern Wench, for example, which really doesn't sound like a metal song if you're being all that objective about it. There's no real heavy guitars or solos or anything. It does just sound like a ballad singing about this lovely woman who runs the shoreside tavern.
Yeah, it's one thing I love about just being musically diverse in your style. Like, uh, we're not limited to a specific musical genre,
Mm.
uh, which is partly why the whole time travel thing was even thought of from the beginning. It's like, we'll say we're time travelers, and it's just an excuse to not be limited to one musical style and have the freedom to just do whatever we want for the fun of it.
I love that as a concept. I always thought I'm surprised that it doesn't exist, honestly. Just some band who does an album in a different genre every time. It seems like such a silly idea that someone should have done it at this point, but at least I've never come across it.
I'm sure someone has, and I've seen artists every now and then take a little bit of a musical departure for one album, and they'll have a theme for that specific album, but it's usually different from the norm. I think with the Cog Is Dead, since every album there's a variety of styles, but they all still sort of feel like the Cog Is Dead's songwriting style. So there's still sort of this cohesiveness across the songs, but I think a lot of the sensibilities that I have come from the artists that I've been inspired by. Um, some of my favorites, and everybody always cites the Beatles, I'm sure, but there's a good reason for it. I grew up listening to them, and their music, especially their later albums, were very eclectic and diverse. Lots of different styles and different genres. The same thing with Queen, one of my favorites. And then I'm also a huge fan of Weird Al. As a kid growing up, like I was drawn to comedy music, and listening to Weird Al's albums, every single song, both the parodies and the original songs that he writes, because half the album is made up of original songs. Each song is done in a totally different style, and every album incorporates different and new musical styles. So growing up and being influenced by all these really diverse artists just kind of made me want to do the same thing with making any albums for anything I did before or since, starting the Cog Is Dead.
That's really cool, and I love when you kind of create this space where you can just be kind of artistic and weird with it, and then just that way, kind of whatever you're into or whatever you're feeling is kind of okay within the space, and you can just be flexible and creative with it. But it's really interesting what
Oh
you
yeah.
say about like the Victorian kind of Beauty and Beast thing of the beautiful like dresses and things like that and suits, and but with the inner workings on the outside. And I've never heard it put that way before, but that's really interesting. But yeah, I can. Okay, now you're making my inner gears start turning.
That's just been sort of the way that I've been able to rationalize why I like it. And like when I really thought about it, I guess that was the only thing I could think was that juxtaposition of two very different things that work together in a beautiful way.
Hmm. I think probably like my first encounter with anything sort of steampunky would have to date back to maybe the Final Fantasy games, because they lured me in with the swords and the cool fight scenes and the cutscenes and all that. But they started to sneak these little sci-fi elements in there, and I was really suspicious at first as a very dedicated fantasy geek about these airships and whatnot. But it started I was young enough still that I was open to everything being really cool, like the Final Fantasy VIII Gunblade. Arguably a ridiculous idea, but yeah, arguably also really cool if you're a geek. So,
Absolutely.
do you remember any of the first sort of steampunky things that you were ever exposed to?
Um, well, I know I mentioned Wild Wild West, which I don't remember the movie that well, but I loved the look of a lot of the mechanical things in it. Um, I think I'd seen some of the first thing I was introduced to formally, I guess, was an anime called Last Exile, which um, I loved the artistry in that, as well as the movie Steam Boy. Um, but yeah, I think what really got me into it was once I started finding other steampunk bands and steampunk conventions and seeing steampunk cosplays and just all these cool creative things that people were doing and making that looked really really detailed. Uh, I think that's sort of what got me into it, was just seeing all these really cool steampunk designs and, and contraptions that people were building.
There's something about goggles that's just can't say what it is. They're just always cool somehow.
Maybe that's just something that goes back to Chippendale's Rescue Rangers. I think I
Oh,
watched that as a kid.
I remember
Gadget
that
had the
one.
goggles, and then other characters. I think I think goggles, yeah, for some reason just seemed cool. It
Yeah,
was always
maybe.
some kind of a mechanic character.
Yeah, pilot or something like that. All the guys who knew how to do the tinkering, who could really pull through, I think. They all had
Right.
goggles.
That's true. Yeah, usually the inventors or the tinkerers, the mad scientists, they all have goggles.
Yes. Yes. And they're all yeah, maybe a little crazy too, which is also alluring in its own way. Interesting.
Musicians are sort of mad scientists as well. It's this is my studio, but it's basically my laboratory, and I come in here to experiment and create crazy new stuff musically.
Yeah. I suppose that's possibly true of all art forms, is that you're really just taking little
For
bits of
sure.
this and that and combining it together and watching explosions happen and seeing if you like it or not.
Yep. That's the artistic process.
Well, I love niche bands as well, or at least theme bands. Sorry, I don't know why I keep using the word niche, but theme bands, because you get to see also, I think, a little bit of a different side of things. For example, like your average band doesn't necessarily go to a lot of conventions or things like that. But what's your experience been like just going to, I suppose, like normal shows versus like the more unusual shows you've gotten to try out with this band?
Like specifically as a performer,
Yeah.
because I would definitely say I love doing the convention shows probably more than any others because that's where our audience really is.
Mm.
We've done shows before at bars and local places, and I've been hired for a corporate event where I'm just sort of background music. So I did a show. It paid well. I'm glad I got to go out and do it, and I had a fun time traveling. But it was at this corporate event, so I was just there because it was a steampunk themed event, and they knew I was a steampunk artist. But I was performing for a huge room full of people, but no one was paying any attention. So I love performing, but I love performing for an appreciative audience. So I felt like I might as well not even be there. But at the steampunk conventions, people usually travel from miles around if they're fans of the Cog Is Dead and they know we're going to be there. So there's always such an enthusiastic crowd, and it's always fun to get a chance to meet people face to face who appreciate the music. Because most of the time, I'm just recording here at home and posting things online, and you'll see comments here and there, which is also really nice. But it's a very different experience meeting people and hearing what the music means to them. And so, yeah, the steampunk conventions are some of the just warmest, most welcoming places that we really love to get a chance to perform at.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think some fellows I know, they haven't been guests on my podcast yet, which is unfortunate, but they have this band called Everfrost, and it's got so many wonderful descriptions of what genre it is, but maybe the original was, I think, anime winter wonderland metal or something like that. But largely they are
That
for
sounds awesome.
anime fans. It's they have manga in their CD sleeves, and all of the songs, I think with the exception of a EP that was mostly cover songs, uh, they have all these stories about this town of Everfrost and all that sort of thing. And it's very cool, but it's also very niche. So it seems as well like their biggest groups of fans have the best time seeing them at local conventions.
That's awesome. That sounds really cool too. I love finding out about bands like that, just sort of within these fan scenes. They're fairly obscure, but most people don't know them. But within that one community, they're really well known and have a really devoted following. That's
Yeah,
really exciting.
actually, these guys as well. Uh, I love to shout them out whenever I get a chance. Also, big geeks, of course, because they're old gamers and like guys who were originally really into the internet. So their sound is described as Sid metal because a lot of their music is just using chip tunes, and I think they were the first. I don't know if they were the first band ever to use chip tunes, but they were definitely the first heavy metal band to use chip tunes. And it's very true that they might not have the biggest spread fan base wise, but the fans that they do have are extremely dedicated and will travel from all over. They'll go to multiple shows. Like I go to see these guys all the time, and the number of people that I see multiple times at their shows is quite a few.
That sounds amazing. I'll have to check them out.
Definitely good. The starting place is a view from the end of the world, but if you dare to go into their universe with their own sci-fi, vaguely steampunkish esque concept album, that one is Phantom Shadow. And they have songs in and out of their uh, story universe here and there, but kind of like you, they also just write songs about whatever. So always just what the vibe is. Do they feel like doing a concept album? Do they just feel like doing one-off songs? Just
Very cool. And I always love finding out about more bands and discovering more music to listen to. I spend most of my time on Spotify listening for like recommendations and just trying to find even more bands to become obsessed with.
yeah. Can you think of any other like unusual band genres that you've come across? Same kind of idea.
Huh. I'm usually so focused within the steampunk community, but every now and then there's one band I haven't seen perform yet, but I've seen that they've been at Dragon Con, and now I'm blanking on their name. Um, the Cybertronic Spree, I think, and I believe they all dress up as Transformers, like from the the Transformers series. So they all wear these big robotic costumes and perform in them. Um, Actually, what's this other band called? I think there's a band called Mac Sabbath, and they dress up as McDonald's characters and perform covers or parodies of Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne songs, but change the lyrics. What's another weird one? There's a band. I keep forgetting names, but there's a Ned Flanders
The
death
Oakley
metal band. They all
Dokleys.
dress like Ned Flanders from The Simpsons, and I think they call themselves a Nedcore band, but I forgot the name.
they're the they're the Oakley Dokleys, aren't they?
Something like that. That might be it. Yeah, I think that the band might be called Oakley Dokley.
Something along those lines. That I've heard of them. They were honestly a little hardcore for my taste.
Me too, but I love the fact that they exist and are doing what they're doing.
Absolutely.
I
I
I always love finding just really unusual and unique bands that commit to whatever really outlandish premise that they've come up with and are I appreciate when somebody does something with that much attention to detail or commitment. They go all the way with whatever their bizarre premise is.
this brings to mind this band called Glory Hammer, which might, now that I think of it, actually have been started by the same guy who started Ailstorm. But it's this extremely strange concept that I don't really know much about it, but everyone in the band has a character, and the singer is Angus McFife, and there's the Hootsman, and all sorts of just weird stuff. And there's a glorious hammer, of course, and all of their songs are about uh, magic and weird, just weird over the top fantasy stuff. It's honestly strange that I haven't paid more attention to it and gone deeper into it, geek that I am. But then there was this strange drama in the band after the singer was fired, and he has gone off and started his own band called Angus McSix and is continuing the story, possibly with weird animosity towards his previous band. And I don't know, but it's just completely bizarre.
Wow.
But dedication to your label or
Yeah,
brand, I suppose.
definitely.
I think heavy metal is probably the genre best where you just find the weirdest things these days, because you used to have heavy metal, and then you threw in some female vocals and some backing orchestrations, and then you had symphonic metal, and you start getting a little bit of that added in, and suddenly there's this bottomless pit of genres, and nothing is quite anything. And you're getting, there's dwarf metal, there's pirate
Hmm.
metal, there's Lord of the Rings metal, there's, I could probably sit here for hours just listing strange, random, one-off niche metal bands that I've heard of.
Oh
It's
yeah. And
wild.
then all sorts of different fandoms and different cultures. The Who are like Mongolian folk metal. Um, there's so many different subgenres of metal out there.
Mm. There's even I'm not sure if you've ever come across this if you don't pay too much attention to the metal scene, but there's this wonderful comic book artist. His name is Jipe Ahonen, and he does this. I think it was just originally like a web comic that he was doing for Inktober or something, called Beelzebubs, and it's about a black metal band, and it was just kind of a cute one-off comic or a month-long comic he was doing, just about really relatable things that starting bands go through, particularly over here in Finland. And it became so relatable that it suddenly got picked up. All of these kind of old famous heavy metal bands started paying attention to it, and now it's this whole wonderful big thing. I think they've released an album and they have some book collections. I think even a couple of stuffed animals. This is the main character's son's Mr. Satan stuffed animal.
It's
just
crazy that it's managed to just grow and become so much bigger than what it started as.
Yeah, I think the big thing that they're still working on is they had done an Indiegogo for something called the 360 Hexperience. And I'm not sure, this seems like a massive animation project of creating a live show in 360, uh, with animations of his band, and it's really cool. I'm looking forward to whenever that gets released. And I'm thinking it might be this year or next year even already. It's been a while, so
Wow, that's awesome. It's amazing what finding an audience and a fan base can do as well for something small. Even like with the Cog Is Dead. When I was starting it, it was just something for fun. I just wanted to make an album and maybe play some shows. And I was like, if anybody, if even 10 people are interested in buying this album, I'll consider it a success. And now 12 years or so, 13 years since that first album has come out, I'm still making music. I'm doing it full time professionally. You know, I bought a house 2 years ago and have built a permanent recording studio. And this was just something that was started in my bedroom just as a side project, and now it's still what I'm doing full time, and am working on finishing another album right now. So, and that's all just thanks to the steampunk community sharing the music and spreading the word and helping to gain a following.
that's so incredible. And I love the power that community has, and I love to see that nowadays it seems to be getting used for good more. I don't know if you do much tabletop role playing games, but there was a big thing in the Dungeons and Dragons community this year where they just basically destroyed capitalist greed. It was amazing.
Awesome.
Uh, they're just a couple whistleblowers and a really strong community that really loves Dungeons and Dragons. The evil corporate overlords were trying to do some really shady business, and the community backlash was so intense that they just had to give up and cancel their evil plan completely.
Wow. That is awesome.
So it's nice to see communities coming together for the sake of good instead of just kind of fighting each other.
Oh yeah. I kind of talk about that a little bit with a song I released last year called Weird. It's the most autobiographical song I've ever written, because normally I write steampunk fiction and songs about fictional characters, but this was um, honestly based on my own experiences as a kid who had severe ADHD. I was very hyper, very creative minded. I couldn't focus in school because I wasn't interested in most of the things being taught, but I was always drawing and wanted to make music and just do creative things. And I was made fun of quite a bit for just my weird behavior as a kid. Uh, but as I got older and started producing videos and making music that people noticed and uh, kind of liked, uh, it was the first time I was able to go from being just looked down on or looked at as this weird kid to, oh, this guy's the creative, artistic kid. And when I found the steampunk community, they fully embraced everything, like my weird musical sensibilities and the performer side, as far as being very theatrical with coming up with a character. All these things that I was into from the time I was a kid. The steampunk community fully embraced it and welcomed me, um, and it's been a great place for, I think, a lot of people. Um, and it's not just the steampunk community. I think it's a lot of these different communities of fans and people with common interests, where outsiders have found a group of people that are very similar to them and finally feel welcome. And so I felt welcome in multiple places, but I think definitely within the steampunk community, it's been the biggest show of support for the music that I have always liked to make.
Hmm.
And I've got to meet so many other similar musicians. I think a lot of the other music acts, uh, Steam Powered Giraffe. I got a chance to meet them, and we've done a song together. And I think we're very similar in a lot of ways. We tend to be very introverted people who just kind of like to work on our music and do our projects at home. Um, but the fans have been super welcoming and super supportive, and a great place to go out and meet like-minded individuals, I guess.
Mhm. I think that's kind of one of the little beauties in internet these days, especially, is that back in the day, if you were a geeky kid who didn't have a lot of friends, then there wasn't really a whole lot you could do about it. But nowadays,
Hmm.
there's the internet where you can find some communities and can talk to people about stuff that you like. I was just actually watching the music video for Weird earlier today, and for the first time hearing just this heavy metal breakdown right in the middle of the song, and just burst out laughing with this delighted grin on my face about how absolutely ridiculously weird this was, in just the way that tickled me right in my own weird little spot.
Thank you. I'm glad you appreciated that. Since the song is called Weird, I figured it would be fun to really jump back and forth with the musical styles. So having the heavy metal headbanging break right after the chorus, and then going right back into sort of that old accordion, and I don't even know exactly what genre I would pinpoint that as. Sometimes I don't I don't even know what to label certain musical styles as, other than this feels kind of steampunk and retro and the style that I want it to sound like.
It's incredible, and I feel like, at least talking about weirdness, I need to at least shout out this guy who I suppose you would consider him a writer, but he would be as much kind of a Twitter slash Instagram personality, and he goes by the Captain, but I think his real name is Kyle Creek. And he just wrote a children's book called William is a Weirdo that seems to be just on this same concept, and I haven't read it yet, which is a shame, but it seems like the point of the book is just about this little boy who's just one of those gosh darn weirdo kids. And I don't know, of course, what the story's about because I haven't read it, but I'm planning to get it as soon as I can, because even if it's for kids, I think that message about embracing your own inner weirdo is such an important one to get out into the world.
Absolutely. That reminds me of a weird idea that me and my friend Chris, who was the bass player years ago, um, had joked about for a while. We wanted to make a children's book called "Some People Are Weird People," but it wasn't really anything too serious. It was just every page would have a different character, and some things were legitimately weird things, and then other things were like, "This is Keisha. She likes broccoli. She's weird. This is Danny. He likes math. He's weird." And then like, "This is Billy. Billy has names for all 10 of his toes. He's weird." But some of them were going to be very weird, and others were just going to be ordinary things. Never finished it. Today, I don't know if I would. I don't know what people would think because it's supposed to just be silly, but I also wouldn't want anyone to think I'm actually making fun of anyone.
Yeah, I love that conceptually, but I can see like there would have to be a certain tone to it to get the message across properly.
Right.
Otherwise, yeah, people might just
It would
think
have
you're
to be clear that
being
it's satire.
judgmental.
Right.
Yeah. Well, speaking of different sounds and everything as well, I'm looking at all of the instruments in the background, and how many instruments can you actually play?
Mostly just guitar and other stringed instruments. So that was what I learned first. So I've got a banjo, a mandolin, ukulele. I can play those okay. And then I have the accordion, which I'm not very experienced with, but I use it a lot. I've never learned, I've never taken lessons. So I've just kind of messed around with it and figured out certain chords and certain things. But I record with it all the time because I love the sound of the accordion, even if I'm not a trained accordionist. Um, and I've got a few other things. I've got a keyboard and I do a lot of stuff with different plugins. There are a lot of virtual instruments now, so I have huge libraries of orchestral samples and things that I use. I try to make music in so many different styles, and when I want to make something that has a big orchestral feel, it's nice to be able to have all of these authentic orchestral instrument sounds in there. Because the way those work is they've recorded every single note on every single instrument, so that you can create your own music using real sounds, and they sound really really cool. Um, so I play the instruments I have here, and then anything I don't have, I'll pull up from these sample libraries and work with, which is really fun as someone that likes so many different musical styles. I just have a lot of creative freedom to make all sorts of different musical genres.
That's super cool. I love like once again, like it's always so easy to be like, technology is extremely suspicious and is leading to a lot of bad things in the world. But then you get to do cool stuff like that as well. So
Yeah, it's kind of how I feel these days. I don't know exactly where things are going to go. There will with a lot of different uses for AI. There will be some amazing uses. There will also be some extremely evil uses.
hmm.
I'm just going to try to navigate just like with any new technology, including like the things that we're using now, like home studios programs like Pro Tools that I use. Those are now the standard, and most people have home studios. But when those came out, it really disrupted the industry when home video editing equipment was available and shutting down video editing facilities. New technologies have always come along and changed things, and some jobs have either had to change or go by the wayside as things change. But I always try to find the positive ways to use anything and hope that hope no one does anything too too awful. But I just try to do my best to to do things well.
Yeah. Well,
So I like
I
using
come
these things for creative and artistic reasons. Especially things like I mentioned with the instrument libraries.
yeah, there's so much cool stuff you can do out there nowadays, and it even offers me the opportunity to do this. So I come from what more than 10 years of just interviewing musicians and having person by person come through and talk to me about their album, and I hear that, hey, this person like really loves Star Wars, but like the managers, they don't want you to talk about that. They want you to promote the album. So like get people hyped about the album. Don't talk about the other stuff in your life that you're like, but people are interested in that. Like if you're a fan
Oh
of
yeah.
someone, you want to know about them, and if us interviewers are never allowed to ask about that stuff, then no one ever knows that, hey, me and John Mondelli both think voice acting is super cool. Like I would have never known that if I didn't have a podcast. So, okay,
Right.
maybe interviews aren't so interesting, but now I can do this. So,
Yeah, and that's awesome. I always appreciate watching long interviews and just casual podcasts with artists that I'm a fan of, just to find out more about them and their interests and interesting stories outside of just the typical things that they're promoting all the time. So yeah, thank you for doing doing a show like this.
well, with that in mind, I was completely, I suppose, in hindsight, I was not surprised, but I did not know that you did voice acting, and that's very cool because I think voice acting is such a cool skill. I am like amateur at it. I might be good at it if I learned, had some training or something, but how did you even get started doing it? And tell me some of your experience with it because it just seems cool to me. I love voice actors. I think good voice actors are a dying breed because they started to get replaced with celebrities, and no,
Hmm.
bad. Voice actors are needed and necessary.
Yes, couldn't agree more on that. Yeah, I guess the same thing. I've always found voice actors to be fascinating. Long before I was even considering trying it myself. As a kid, I would watch. I always loved watching any behind the scenes features on Disney movies when they would show the actors recording, just seeing the process behind making a cartoon, and that there's actually a person recording the voice. And people like Mel Blanc, who did tons of character voices for Looney Tunes, and just that was something that really amazed me as a kid, seeing these really talented people that could create all these different characters and sounds with their voices. It wasn't anything I ever considered being able to do myself. I just thought it was really, really fascinating. Um, I didn't think I was talented enough to do different voices or try different accents or anything like that. And I've always been self-conscious and shy about a lot of things, even though I also have always loved to act and perform. I've always been a very reserved person as well. So I never tried pursuing that for many, many years, even though I did do some stage shows throughout school. I loved acting on stage. Um, but it was voice acting was never anything I even thought would be a possibility, because back then you had to have an agent and you had to be in a city where productions were being done. Like in the U.S., in L.A. or New York, some of the places where um, stuff is, and I guess these days Atlanta, a lot of animation is being done. But yeah, um, you had to live in a city and go to a studio and record. And it wasn't until, ironically, the same friend, Chris, I mentioned, who was our bass player for the first couple of albums. He said that he was interested in voice acting and asked me to help him record a voiceover demo. And through the process of recording his demo, it got me interested in just giving it a shot because I always found it interesting. So I started doing research and just looking online at how to get into it, and just from there, just developed a passion for it and started auditioning for different projects on online voice acting forums for no pay, just for the fun of it, and started getting cast in some of these little cartoons. And it just grew from there. Then I started auditioning for paid work, and now I do a mixture of things for regular clients as well as audition for new stuff frequently, which is how I've been able to work on all sorts of cartoons and games and TV shows and projects. Mostly all smaller independent things, but a few things that have actually gone on to have a pretty big audience. But either way, uh, I love the process of working on anything, whether it's a major national or worldwide release like a game, or just something that's a small independent thing, but it's really fun to work on. I just really enjoy voicing characters and bringing them to life.
I love that. Have you ever played any tabletop role playing games? Because there's always a deep need for people who can do voices in the role of the GM.
Surprisingly, no, I haven't, and I have been interested in playing some, and just never got together with a group that did. I've been with people that played other games, but I think maybe the closest things I could think of are like Settlers of Catan or Heroescape, but they're nowhere near as in depth character wise as D&D or something like that.
There's one GM that I love to shout out. He's, I guess, college humors may be changing their name to Dropout these days, and in their subscription service, they have a D&D show called Dimension 20, and their GM, uh, honestly, professional quality voice actor, just because since the age of 8, he's been doing different voices as a GM. So he's just, in order to help him kind of keep all of the characters straight in his head as he's juggling all of the NPCs in the world, he added voices to them. And then this developed into him having just this massive repertoire of different voices he pulls out all of the time. And people are, whoa, are you a professional voice actor? No, I've just been a nerd since I was a kid.
That's really awesome. I'm sure he could get into it though.
Surely. I think actually, now that I think about that I wonder if that's kind of the same deal with Matt Mercer, who is well known from this Dungeons and Dragons show Critical Role, but he's also quite, I think, well seasoned voice actor. He's
Oh
been
yeah,
some,
I'm not even familiar with Critical Role, but I know the name Matt Mercer specifically from like voice acting.
yeah, I think Overwatch is, he's who's the gunslinger in Overwatch? McCree? Is that his name?
Sounds right.
Yeah, I think that's Matt Mercer, and I'm not sure what else he's done, but he's great. Of course, he's been on Dimension 20 a few times as well, so you always get a little taste of his different voices. I think he's played an insecure ring wraith, and he has played a cursed rat man. I think he's also GM'd a season as well, so it was the prologue season for Game of Thrones Candyland theme, and lots of great
That's really
voices out
cool.
there.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I've been doing it for a while now. I guess full time for a little over 10 years, and kind of the same thing. It went from having a little makeshift corner in a room with some blankets hung around for acoustic treatment to it being a long lasting enough career to invest in actually building this studio so that I can do both. So I built this room to meet all of my needs for both music production and voiceover, which is why it's got acoustic foam everywhere, including on the ceiling. I wanted the entire room to be completely sound treated, and it's worked out beautifully.
That's great. That's great. Uh, you were telling me in some emails that you've met a few of the classic voice actors as well. Did you feel like sharing any of those stories?
I've had a chance to meet a lot of different voice actors at conventions. Mostly just as a fan, just going for fun. I mean, I perform at conventions with the band, but also my wife and I love to just go and collect autographs from the voice actors and other uh, actors, both live action and from whatever other projects that we like. Um, yeah, I got to meet John DiMaggio. Actually, he's the voice of Bender from Futurama and lots of other things. And had him sign a copy of I Know That Voice, which is a documentary that he produced all about voice acting, which I'm a big fan of. And for anyone that's interested in getting into voice acting, I recommend checking it out just to see how all these different voice actors talk about their experiences doing it and uh, find out a little bit about it. It's not really a thing telling you how to get into the industry, but I find it very inspirational for someone who wants to get into a job like that. Um, but I mentioned to John DiMaggio that he and I actually both voiced barbarian characters from the Clash of Clans universe. I voiced the barbarians in the game Clash Royale, and he voiced a few of the barbarians in the animated short series they have called Clash-orama. Um, so that was really cool. Actually, yeah, I think I mentioned this in the email. Most recently, I found out that a cartoon I was cast in, I think around the end of 2020, um, I was cast in a role in this independent animated series. And then when it came time to record, I never got an email or anything, and that's kind of typical. Sometimes projects just fall apart, or uh, things just don't always always come to fruition. So that I didn't even think too much of it, and then maybe about a year or so later, I saw them post on the Instagram account that animation was nearing completion, and so I was like, oh, I was actually very happy that this guy who was doing this as a passion project was still able to complete it. So I just congratulated him. Like, I'm so glad to see that the show is still going forward and you were able to make this happen. And that's when he told me, he's like, oh yeah, and you'll be surprised to find out that you were replaced with none other than Dana Snyder, who is most well known as Master Shake from Aqua Teen Hunger Force, or Gazpacho on Chowder. I think he's currently on the show The Ghost, and Molly McGee is the voice of Scratch. I think it's the main ghost character. But uh, I was actually really excited to hear that he replaced me, because I was having a little trouble with the character voice, like having trouble knowing for sure if it was exactly what the director wanted. Um, but when I heard that he was cast in the role, I was like, yeah, he's perfect for it. For this just awkward, kind of stupid, really weird character that they wanted for this show. But anyway, so I decided to mess with him when he was at this convention back in March, and I just walked up and I said, "Hey, I got a bone to pick with you. You stole my role." And he's like, "Oh, what role was that?" And I talked to him about it, and but he was really cool about it, and we were just joking. And but I had him sign a poster with a picture of the character for the show, and I wrote at the top, "Dana Snyder stole my role," and when he signed it, he wrote, "Thanks for the part, sucker." Pointed like
Oh,
arrows, me, not you. Yeah,
amazing.
but I've met a lot of like my voice acting heroes. Most recently, I got to meet Rob Paulson and Maurice LaMarche, who were the voices of Pinky and the Brain. And Rob is Yakko on Animaniacs. Maurice LaMarche is lots of characters in Futurama, and both of them have just tons and tons of roles. They were extremely nice. Was I just thinking about? I've met a few people that I've had the chance to voice double for. Jason Marsden, who was in a Goofy movie as Max, and lots of other stuff. Um, and then Jim Cummings, who voices everyone from Winnie the Pooh and Tigger to a lot of really gruff characters in a lot of the Disney films. He's got a pretty iconic gravelly voice. I voiced one of his characters in a Transformers Rescue Bots game, because a lot of times these games they don't have the budget to bring in the original voice actors, because they're just being done by these small independent companies that the studios farm the product out to. Um, so I got to voice one of his characters. The line was something like, You could see them after I test my merchandise. And that was just mimicking him. But I actually met him before I did that. I can't remember the one other person I was thinking of that I was going to to mention. That always happens. That's a problem with my ADHD. Like I get sidetracked so easily and then completely forget what I was going to say. but but yeah, I've loved getting a chance to meet a lot of my favorite voice actors. Oh, actually, now I just remembered. It was Steve Bloom. Uh, he's the original, the English voice of Spike in Cowboy Bebop, Tom on Toonami on Adult Swim. Um, but I was excited to meet him because it was right after the game Metro Exodus had come out, and he voices one of the characters in the game. I think he's the only American voice actor in it, because the game takes place in Russia, and they actually cast Russian voice actors for all the other roles. And I was talking to him about the fact that they licensed one of the Cog Is Dead songs for that game, because the song is about this prison train in Siberia, and this game takes place on a train, and so it just like worked out perfectly, that song fit in with the theme of the game. So I just wanted to go and get a picture and with him, but he's like, "Hey, if it's like we're both in the game, I'll sign the cover for you." So he just gave me a free autograph and signed the cover of my copy of the game, and he was really really cool. I think most of these voice actors I've met, actually, I think every voice actor I've met has been really really nice and really down to earth and really cool. But it's been really surreal, I guess, more and more in recent years, getting to meet them, not just as a fan, but a lot of times being like, oh, we actually worked on this project together in some capacity. That was fun.
That's awesome. And I'm really fascinated by just the whole convention culture in the US, because there are for sure conventions over in Finland, but there's only a couple of them and they're pretty small. So I think apart from one that I went to in Calgary back when I lived in Canada, the only other convention I've been to was Worldcon when it came to Finland a few years ago, which I guess that happened because George R. R. Martin likes Finland and he endorsed Finland to host Worldcon. And I guess that, like, it was kind of a problem because Finland, uh, the population, I don't even know if it's 6 million in this country, so there's not that many people, so they weren't expecting like a huge turnout, I guess. And there was a massive turnout, and they just kind of, I don't know, they didn't really have enough stuff for everyone to do. It seemed like they had this whole like center that they use for conventions, and very little of it was really put to use, and it was kind of a shame. They just, I guess, had no idea what to expect. So my my experience with conventions is like, I got an autograph from George R. R. Martin, and I got to interview Scott Lynch, who was also really nice, and I got to interview Robin Hobb, which was really cool. But then the only other, I think, convention I went to was kind of an anime convention, as I said, in Calgary, and I dressed up with some friends, but and then we just took pictures of other people who were dressed up, but I don't know that they had any special guests or anything like that. So I'm really interested in what conventions in the US are like, because I've heard that they're really cool.
Yeah, and there are a lot of conventions in the US all over the place. I feel like just about every major city has a convention center, and usually it's used for some big fandom convention of some kind. And then there are so many smaller conventions. Um, I've been to everything from the huge ones like Dragon Con in Atlanta, which is one of the biggest in the country, and MegaCon in Orlando, to tiny little local first year cons where it's just one ballroom set up in a hotel somewhere with a bunch of vendors. But there are so many. I don't know. I feel like if you really wanted to, you could probably go to a different convention every weekend, depending if you're willing to travel around. Um, but yeah, they're usually really really fun, especially I feel like I've been to more steampunk conventions now than any, just because of how many shows we've done. Um, those can range from small to, I'd say, moderately good size. There are some big ones, but I don't think there's any steampunk convention quite on the scale of like a MegaCon or one of those huge fandom conventions. But there have been some really fun ones. One of my favorites has been Wild Wild West Con in Tucson, Arizona, which I haven't been to in a few years. But last time I was there was in 2020, right at the start, right before everything went into lockdown. But it took place at Old Tucson Studios, which is now closed, unfortunately, but it was a movie studio built back in the 1940s where they filmed Western movies. So a lot of John Wayne movies and a lot of the Westerns over the years were filmed there. And in recent years, it was being used as a theme park, but they would hold this Wild West themed steampunk convention at this movie studio backlot. So the entire convention, instead of being indoors at a hotel somewhere, you're walking around in a Western town, and the panels are taking place in like the old chapel or this cave they have set up with an auditorium seating. Um, and the concert takes place in an old Wild West saloon. So everything feels very much like something out of a Western movie. That's I guess a typical convention, but it's one of my favorites. Um, but yeah, that I feel like there are a lot of really decent sized cons that take place all over year round, and quite a few of them bring in big guests. Some of the ones I've been to recently have had, I guess, I don't know if I should even need to list like long names of celebrities, but a lot of the usual people in either sci-fi or fantasy or movies or comics or anime or most things that you can think of that have a good following. They usually bring in good guests. The most recent one I was just at had a lot of the Lord of the Rings cast. I didn't get to meet them. Um, in fact, they had so many people show up for the panel. My wife got in line and they had to turn people away because the room was full, which is understandable. But but yeah, the convention culture here is huge.
That's who
And people are
who's
really into cosplay, of course. It's a great excuse to see a lot of really, really elaborate cosplays.
I can imagine. Who's kind of big in the fantasy scene? Because I know, of course, sci-fi. You've got your Stargates and your Babylon 5s and your Battlestar Galacticas and all of that. There's tons and tons and tons of great sci-fi programming, but the fantasy ones always tend to flop a little bit. And uh,
Yeah, I'm actually not as familiar with the fantasy scene as some of the others, so I don't know for sure. Like I guess I mentioned Lord of the Rings kind of falls into that, but I I don't know for sure. Mostly what I feel like I see are guests that are in movies or TV shows that have a big following, things from a lot of the um maybe the DC TV series or a lot of the Marvel films. A lot of things from the 90s now are retro. So there's one convention called 90s Con where they have a lot of people that were really big in uh, at least American pop culture in the 90s. A lot of the TV stars from a lot of the sitcoms in the 90s, like Full House and Family Matters and Boy Meets World, a lot of those shows. Um, yeah, there's some of the ones that we go to usually have a good mix of people from some of the bigger sci-fi stuff from the 80s and 90s, like Back to the Future or Karate Kid, things that were big then, as well as from a lot of the sitcoms and TV shows of the 70s and 80s. Wrestling is also really big. I've never really been into that, but they always have a lot of wrestlers as guests.
I think WWE is one of those things that just kind of crept onto my radar recently because one of the D&D podcasts I listen to, the GM is a big WWE fan. So he started telling these stories about particularly I think he recommended people go watch this video called "The Cream of the Crop" with the Macho Man Randy Savage, and
Mhm.
that man was just batshit insane in the way he
Oh
contained.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. Just the way he talked, the way he held himself, everything was so crazy. And then I learned about this concept of kayfabe, and that these guys were just like hardcore actors who were in character all the time, to the degree that their wives didn't even know what was real or not. And I just thought this was mind-bogglingly cool, but I'm just so busy with everything and juggling my mental health and everything. I'm not allowed to go down the WWE wormhole, because I'm sure it will swallow me, and I'm going to get so just fascinated by all of these characters and the wild story arcs that they came up with. It's just so strange and so cool.
Yep. It's one of those things that I've always thought was funny when you realize that it's all acting, it's all a performance, and it's all theatrics. That some people take it so seriously as if it's real, um, and yet and a lot of people that not everyone, but some people that were really into like WWE look down on nerds and geeks, and thought of wrestling as being the more like, I don't know if it's the macho or cool thing, or but didn't think of it as nerdy. And yet when you really look at how it's all done, they're all performers, they're actors, they're playing characters, they're essentially on a stage. It's all very much a geekdom, or a fan, the same kind of fandom as anyone that's into any other kind of if you want to, I don't know, I keep wanting to say like sci-fi or fantasy, or but whatever it is, it's all entertainment and it's all acting.
Yeah. I still remember back in the 90s when no one really knew if it was real or not back then. So there was always just like the parents, oh, I'm not sure my kids should be watching that. I always just thought like 90s man ballerinas, right? Like they're dancers who pretend to beat each other up, and it's just choreography, right? Like in of course my like
I mean,
10-year-old
I
brain.
don't think anyone could actually physically assault and injure someone full time and not have any issues. So it has to all be performance.
But then again, they do have like MMA, so
Oh
but
yeah,
those guys are
there's
always
definitely
attacked.
real extreme fighting out there as well. But just I guess the world of WWE is
Yeah, I guess
is
you
very
can't be
very
throwing people off
much a theatrical
cages
thing.
and whacking them with chairs and whatnot. Huh. So one other thing that I think a lot of nerdy kids tend to do, I don't know, maybe the cool kids did this too, but at least I never heard about it. But you were saying that you like to make videos, and I know there was at least a phase in my life as a young geek where we definitely stole the family camcorder and went around just doing weird shit and making small, terrible videos around the neighborhood. But apparently, you've actually done some clearly more professionally produced stuff than uh, mom's video camera videos.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that for the longest time was my primary passion. Being a filmmaker. Um, the music thing was always something I kind of did on the side. I learned to play guitar and I would write goofy little songs, but I didn't take it seriously. And the same thing as far as like acting goes. I performed in school plays, but the for whatever reason, I was really, really drawn to being a filmmaker and wanting to make comedy movies. And so I would use the family camcorder and write scripts and try to make my own independent movies. That none of them really came to completion back then. but I did a lot of my school projects as videos. Um, Thankfully, I had teachers that just would allow me to do that if I asked. Like if we had to write a book report, um, I said, well, instead of writing a book report, can I do a video and show it to the class? And so we did a video in school where my friend and I dressed up as Siskel and Ebert doing a review of the book The Outsiders, which was our assigned book to read in class. So we dressed up in costume. He had a bald cap on, and I had a wig. And um, so for years, I would do my school projects that way anytime I had the chance to do a video. And then when I got out of school, in high school, one of my fellow classmates was also a really passionate filmmaker, and we just clicked right away. We were assigned to work on a video together, and we both really like admired each other's work, and so there was that kind of mutual respect for each other's talent, and we once we got out of school, went on to work on an independent film that we really wanted to make a big, ambitious sci-fi comedy, and spent 9 years working on this movie, just putting our own money into it, spending all of our free time on it. Um, and in the end, we finished the movie, and we were extremely proud of it. We had a big family and friend premiere at a theater, and then managed to get a distribution deal. It wasn't anything too major, but it got a DVD release in the US and in the UK. The UK release got a completely different marketing. The movie is called Flashback, and they decided to retitle it Time Lord, which the title makes no sense whatsoever. I assume they're just trying to appeal to Doctor Who fans with the title or something, but there is no Time Lord in this film whatsoever. but but yeah, like filmmaking has always been a big passion. And the same team that worked on that movie, we started a YouTube channel initially just as like a viral marketing campaign for the movie. Because the movie is about a Hollywood studio in the future that makes these terrible movies. So we started a YouTube channel that was going to be parody videos and supposedly the terrible movies that the fictional studio, is making. And then it just developed into this uh, thing all on its own, this YouTube channel where we would just make parody videos. And um, I don't know, we worked on all sorts of things. Like the one I sent you, I think, was the Hobbit games, which is a mashup of the Hobbit and the Hunger Games. And a lot of the videos were usually mashing up two different things. The most successful one was Diary of a Wimpy Alien, which is a cross between Diary of a Wimpy Kid and the Alien movies, the James Cameron films. And that it's kind of ironic that the reason we came up with that idea was because there was a new Diary of a Wimpy Kid movie and a new Alien movie coming out on the same day, and so we just decided to mash them up. And this was years before Barbenheimer happened this year, where it seemed like two very different movies coming out on the same day just led to this huge phenomenon. So I don't know. We were ahead of our time, I guess, on that sort of concept.
Incredible. That's There's always just a lot of fun that you can have, I feel like, with YouTube these days. That, of course, that it's very oversaturated and there's a lot of nonsense as well, but you find just all sorts of really strange creative things out there. There's, like epic rap battles from history, which is just uh, random two random people making mean music at each other, and or this guy who does true facts about animals. I think his channel is Zafrank1 or something like that, and he uses a very strange voice, and he has all this beautiful footage of animals, both well known and unusual, and then does these kind of 10-15 minute long videos of true facts about them, but it's very comedic and done in this strange voice, and always just kind of tickles me right in my specific weird little sense of humor. And so there's always such like interesting things that you can do with technology and art these days. It's always so interesting to me.
Oh yeah. it allows us to have an audience as well. That I think was the big thing. When I was a kid, before YouTube existed, I would just make these videos just to fulfill my own creative desire. And, you know, I would show them to my family, or I would make things and show them to my school classmates, and that's about it. And then they would just sit on a VHS tape in my house and collect dust after that. But now we can make these videos and share them with a worldwide audience, and it allows anyone with that sort of filmmaker passion to make something and then actually have it seen. So that's one really cool thing about uh, the kind of technology and internet availability we have now with a lot of things. Same thing with the music with the Cog Is Dead. I mean, if it wasn't for social media and having any kind of an online presence, um, I would have no way of sharing the music other than going out and I guess touring. And you know, it's the way everyone had to do it before the internet. You would have to book as many shows as you could and get out and be seen. And now you can record your music from home and put it out on SoundCloud or YouTube, or in our case, it was MySpace, because we started back around 2007, I think was when we first started posting things. Um, but yeah, and like you said too, things are a little oversaturated. There are so many people out there now producing content that it's easy to get lost in the shuffle. But at the same time, if you make something that's interesting enough or good enough, you can usually get seen. Um, and if it's seen by the right people, they can help spread it even further. So that's one really cool thing, not having to worry about the gatekeepers, you know, that there used to be when everything was just solely through the major studios and major outlets.
Yeah, that brings me back to machine supremacy, because I think in my very first interview that I did with them, they told this story about how they just completely started on the internet. They were just a bunch of guys in college or whatever, playing with chip tunes and guitar solos and just having fun, and they didn't think it would necessarily be a thing, but they put it on the internet on like free download sites, and people liked it and they spread it around and started asking for shows. But as the story kind of goes, it was just kind of impossible for them to book shows without having a record label. And they even have this one story about there being a festival in Sweden, where they're from, uh, who had done a poll saying, uh, what band would you most want to see come play at our festival? And they were the winner of this poll. So they got in contact with the festival and said, would you like us to play? We were voted most wanted to see here. And the festival wouldn't take them because they didn't have a record label.
Wow.
So they did eventually join Spine Farm for a while, but I think I'm not sure completely what the deal was, but I think after a while they felt like the label people maybe wanted a little too much input in their creative process, and so they just dropped the label when they were able to. And nowadays they're not hugely active. I think they've been taking it easy during the COVID years, and they've all got day jobs and stuff, so they don't have that desperate need to push content out. So they can kind of just do it when they have time and inspiration. But I think, from what I understood, it's much more flexible to just be able to do things yourself, even if that
Oh
kind of
yeah.
pressure to always have a record label to succeed is there. But in that same kind of way, like the Cog Is Dead, they have that really tight fan base who will always travel for them. So even if they maybe don't
Yeah.
appeal to the masses, then they'll still get a good crowd wherever they play.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds very, very similar to, you know, our experience with starting the Cog Is Dead. In the very beginning, we were just going to be online, or a studio project. It was just going to be recording the music and putting it out there, and that was it. There were no plans for live shows. And then the steampunk community started to spread the music, and there started to be requests to perform at conventions. And the first few shows we tried to make happen, but the entire band was not available to do the shows since we were just doing the studio project and the schedules didn't really line up. And it wasn't until we finally had an opportunity to do a show opening for Apney Park, who were, you know, the main band that inspired us to want to be a steampunk band. So at that point, I said, "All right, well, we should just make the show happen." And so it was, at the time we were a 4-person band, but we just did it as a 2, just guitar and drums. But that was what started the next chapter of incorporating live shows as something we did. Um, but yeah, for a very long time, it was like, no, we're just a studio band and just releasing online. We never had any record label interest. We never approached a record label either, and I'm kind of thankful that we never had to deal with the potential of being taken advantage of or having someone else own our masters. You know, I'm very happy that I've managed to stay completely independent and own everything, and you know, haven't had any issues like that. Because I hear a lot of horror stories involving labels. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, and thankfully so far we haven't played any like major festivals, but we haven't had any shows not happen because we weren't on a label. Most things like the conventions, they're just hiring us to come out and perform. So
Mm.
it's worked out pretty nicely that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, the
Oh,
internet is what kind of allowed it all to happen. With MySpace in the very beginning, I created a MySpace page, and then I just started looking through people who were friends of other steampunk bands and sending them friend requests. I would I would literally spend every single night just sending friend requests until I met my like friend request limit for the day, just in hopes of getting the band name out there and getting some attention. And surprisingly, it actually worked. There were a few people that took note. One of them was DJ Dr. Q, who was a steampunk DJ and also happened to be head of the Dragon Con alternate history track. So he helped us to play Dragon Con a couple of times on the main stage, which is still one of my absolute favorite places we've ever played because it's got a massive ballroom and a really awesome professional stage set up with a huge video screen. So we get to bring our videos that we always try to incorporate in the show. That became a thing that it grew from just being us performing to including pre-recorded video segments, kind of like the screen I've got back here. We would have our logo up on the screen, and then we would have commercial breaks with parody commercials and things like that. I know I'm kind of getting sidetracked from whatever the main point was, but I'm just kind of rambling.
as is how this podcast goes.
Oh yeah.
I'm not sure what the crossover with like geeks and kids who had some form of ADD or ADHD, because I'm not sure how I was as a kid. I think I was able to focus a lot more as a kid than I am as an adult, weirdly enough. But whenever people talk about having ADD or ADHD nowadays, I'm always like, this really sounds like me a lot. I
I don't
often
think it's a
wonder.
coincidence.
Yeah, maybe
I think,
maybe
uh, yeah, I think that people with ADHD, our our brains just are wired differently. It's very hard to focus on things that don't interest us. Like I always had a hard time in my academic classes in school, especially things that I had a hard time following. And usually it was because they didn't hold my attention enough for me to be able to really learn. So like especially things like math class, I was just always bad at math because it did not interest me at all. But the any artistic or creative things like any art classes, music classes, those I loved. I was very fortunate to have there was a high school. It wasn't the high school that I would have been assigned based on where I lived, but it was close enough. They had a program called the Academy of Television and Communications Technology. Uh, And basically they offered classes in Photoshop and video editing and all these things that most schools didn't offer as part of their curriculum. But just this is just a public high school, not anything special, but they just offered these classes. So I was accepted into the school, and most of the things that I do every day now were things that started out learning in high school. The TV production, I also went to drama, theater class, and all of the Photoshop skills and the video editing skills are definitely things that I used. In fact, the first Cog Is Dead album was mixed entirely in Adobe Premiere, which is a video editing program. It's not a music production program, but it was the only program I had ever mixed audio in because I used it for all my video editing. So all of the audio tracks are layered in a Premiere timeline and then done that way. For the second album, I got Pro Tools and haven't gone back because it's way easier and way faster. But I learned so many things at that school. So, I'm trying to try to remember what the main point was. That's right. It was being distracted and ADHD. But yeah, I think for a lot of creative people, I think there probably are a lot of people with ADHD who are very creative minded people, and it's probably because it's hard to focus on things that don't give you that, I guess, you know, dopamine reward, that aren't exciting, but the things that are exciting, you just hyper fixate and focus on, which is why I can work on a song for hours on end. Why I was able to work on that movie Flashback that we made, which took 9 years to make, and it was day after day of constant work, but it was something that I was really excited about and passionate about, so I could really hyper focus on that. So I'm assuming probably the case for a lot of people, and why a lot of musicians and other people that are creatively minded are also people with ADHD or ADD.
Yeah, so I often wonder if there's some correlation between having a creative mind and maybe not being able to focus so much on the standard academic studies, maybe being a bit more creative, not having friends, so you go home and do creative stuff instead. Like for me, I was a little bit too out there. I can't say I was bullied a whole lot per se, because either I had older brothers and that protected me, or I just had a weird attitude where I didn't seem to really care if people made fun of me. So it it wasn't giving people whatever they wanted to mess with me. So I was kind of the weird kid that, like, let's just ignore that one. I wasn't too out there, but I did have my moments. And so not having a lot of friends, I loved Final Fantasy and King's Quest and all Lord of the Rings and all of that stuff. So I would go home and I would write fantasy stories. I was obsessed with The Legend of Zelda. I got really heavily into Ocarina of Time, and I was a decent drawer, so I started drawing every character that was in the manual, just obsessively. And I ran out of that and I started drawing Majora's Mask. And then some of them got a little too hard, maybe. I didn't finish everything in Majora's Mask, but then I started drawing my own characters who were just kind of bad knockoffs of Link, maybe with a different hair color, or this one's a girl, so she's got long hair, but it was all just Link, really. And that eventually spawned into my first story that I started writing, and that spawned into a 13 book arc of nonsense that I eventually abandoned in favor of something else I've been working on for 15 years, and so on and so forth. But it does seem like a lot of the creative people you talk to maybe have kind of a similar story about not having such a social life, so they spent more time doing the creative stuff instead.
Yeah, no, then that sounds a lot like my experience in school as well. I think most of my bullying was in the earliest years, from maybe I don't know, maybe my first 4 to 5 years of school when I was really young. And when I got a little bit older into maybe, I don't know, grades 11 through 13, I started to care a little bit less and just tried to act out and get reactions out of people. And then by the time I got into high school, I was more reserved. And that was when I started to create, using the, I guess, my creativity more as an outlet and making videos that were shown. We had a school TV show, so I would make videos for that and try to do things that way instead of acting bizarre. and um and yeah, I would kind of do the same thing as far as like work on something for hours. If I had an idea for a video project, I would go home and I'd be like writing all night, or I would be editing in, long into the night, even though I had school the next day. um I would draw things all the time. Someone in one of my art classes introduced me to Ranma One Half, his anime from the 80s. And I started borrowing all these bootleg VHS tapes that he had recorded from videos he rented at the video store and made copies of. And I would just get a new one from him every week or so just to watch the series. And then I would start drawing the characters and make my own, fan made comics. And just I don't even, I have boxes, I think, of old drawings from high school of just various anime characters or other comic characters that I came up with, or just comics of my friends. I didn't have a lot of friends. I had like 2 friends that I was super close with. Um, and then of course they were always the ones that I would put in the videos. They were the, my regular cast.
Yeah, like I said, it always sounds like us nerdy kids had a bit of the same story. Whatever it was that you were interested in was probably a little different, but you always had some safe thing that you loved to go back to, that you could just kind of forget about whatever was going on. I think, like, my bullying was kind of, they had to get a little creative with me because, okay, I kind of dressed funny. I had a tendency, at least in high school, to wear clothing that was way too big for me. So I was this kind of shapeless skater girl looking kind of kid. But the weird thing about me that people would try and latch onto was that I played violin. If you're from East Coast Canada, this is a nothing thing that everyone there, it's very Celtic influenced part of Canada, so everyone and their dog plays violin in East Coast Canada. But in hillbilly Alberta, it's a very, very rare thing to play violin. So there were efforts, maybe after a while I stopped going to the talent shows, because even if I was good, the snide remarks were maybe not worth it. But I think I never really reacted to those snide remarks. If someone was a dick to me, then I would just kind of ignore them. And I suppose that was what kept me safe largely. And I think also my brothers had prepared me, because I have twin brothers that are 6 years older than me. So I was always kind of a little bit behind them in school. So people knew I had brothers, so I had that layer of defense. But my brothers, like, my whole family tend to look really young. And my brothers, in particular, being twins who already look very young, when they were 19, they could have been 14 still. So they, people tried to pick on them for being little boys, but they had each
Mm.
other, so they were pretty resilient to whatever. I was born with a best friend. If you don't like me, whatever. And so they prepared me really nicely. They're like, okay, so people are going to try and pick on you for being little, but all you have to do is remind them that by the time you're 18, everyone's going to be carding you until you're 40, whereas all those other people, by the time they're 20, no one's going to card them anymore because they look so old. People are really insecure about looking old. So you're going to look young for a really long time, and just throw that back in their faces and they'll never make fun of you. And that was completely true. Anytime someone tried to mock me for being little, I would just be like, I might look little now, but I'm going to be looking great when I'm 40, and you're going to be looking like haggard and old and terrible. So and I think, yeah, people just kind of left me alone after a while. So Shout out to my
Nice.
brothers for bracing me for bullying.
Yeah, that's true. Having some, I guess, some wiser older siblings that can help a little bit preparing must be a big help.
Yeah. They also did all of the bullying for everyone else. So all of the horribleness that happened in my childhood probably came from my brothers.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, school was okay, but older brothers, they were the big problem.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. That's a whole different experience dealing with bullying at school versus dealing with siblings and fighting with them.
it's true. There was just no way I could win against my brothers because I was younger, so I was weaker and stupider, and there was also two of them. So the only thing I could do was go be a crybaby and complain to a higher authority. And then that just made me a narc little loser. So there was truly no winning. Uh, the only thing I ever learned to do that was beneficial was to, if anyone was trying to mess with me physically, I dropped and I clung to their leg because then they couldn't get rid of me and they couldn't move, and I would just cling there tenaciously like a crazy little koala, and as they'd be kicking the leg trying to get rid of me until they got annoyed with me enough that I thought they would leave me alone, and then I would release and scamper off.
Sounds like a pretty good move.
You learn what you have to with enough time, I suppose.
Do what you have to do to survive.
Well, we've been at this for quite a while, so I think we could probably start wrapping up a little bit. But just out of curiosity, who are some of the guys you've got on display there? And maybe share some of the stuff that you think, nerdy or not, but maybe deserves a shout out right now. Some cool stuff that you've been seeing around.
Cool. What I have over here are mostly action figures from some of the things that I've worked on. I have a lot of the characters from Clash Royale here. That's what most of these are. I mentioned earlier, I've got the Barbarians, got a couple of them. These guys have a lot of screaming in the game. A lot of there are no lines of dialogue from them. It's just a lot of rah, hoo, rah. And then the lumberjack, his lines are timber, chop chop. The knight, who is a cousin of the barbarian, but he's also got a little bit of a French accent, so his lines are things like ha ho. I think the one that I'm most proud of is the Electro Wizard, because this is the only character that I was the original voice of. So I'm the very first person ever to voice this character. He was introduced in the game Clash Royale, and so this is the first action figure of an original character in like any kind of major project that I've ever worked on. And he's also one of the most fun to voice because they wanted him to sound kind of jittery, like he was, being electrocuted all the time when he's blasting electricity from his hands. So in my audition, I decided to do this trick where I would basically shake, and vibrate my neck or throat to kind of have that kind of sound. Which I kind of stole from Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, because when he does SpongeBob's laugh, I'm not perfect at it, but he basically does this to create that sound. So that's what I would do for his lines. Electricity! Zap! So that's one of my favorite characters from the game, and again, just proud to actually have my own action figure. This isn't one of the characters I voiced, but this is a character from a game that I was in. This is the main character from the game A Hat in Time. But I voice the first video game boss, the mafia boss. There's a mafia of cooks, so he's like this chef mafia boss.
Incredible.
This I just got just yesterday. My characters have not come out yet. I'm hoping they will, but this is from a series called Mighty Man, based on these Mighty Wheels toys. They're various construction trucks. So that you actually see my characters in the background here. Crank, this crane, move his arm down, and then Tater, the cement mixer. I do the voices of both of those. So whenever those toys come out, they'll actually have my voice, and they're the first talking toys that I've ever been able to do, which is that's another one of those things. Like as a voice actor, and even as a kid, I always thought it would be really cool to be the voice of a toy. So eventually, whenever those are available, I want to get them. But Mighty Man, just so you can see, has a button here so you can hear his voice.
That's the voice of Bill Rogers, the creator of the show, and the guy who cast me in this series. So anyway, I just have this on display. It's not my character, but I am in the series, and I'm looking forward to getting a chance to get the ones with my characters. Other than that, trying to think if there's anything like current to talk about to draw attention to. I can think of current projects that I'm working on, I guess, along that line. I'm currently working on this Spider-Man stop motion animated musical, which it's really cool premise, I think, because I'm also a fan of musicals, and I've wanted to write a musical for quite a while. It still hasn't happened. I haven't had the time. But it's like the Spider-Man origin story as a musical, and it's all fully stop motion animation. But I was cast as the voice of J. Jonah Jameson, and there's a whole song. They've already posted a clip of it, so I guess it's okay to mention that. But got a whole song. This guy's a crook, I tell ya. This guy's a criminal. What kind of person doesn't show us his face? So
fantastic.
That was an interesting challenge. I felt like I could get into character with the speaking lines, but singing as Jameson was a a bit of a challenge. I had to do a lot of takes, but I'm happy with the end result we've got, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it animated.
I can imagine. It's one thing I've noticed when I play with voices. Just generally, I sing at my cats a lot, and so I do it in weird voices a lot of the time. And I've just noticed sometimes I'm like, yeah, it's not easy to sing in a different voice necessarily. You don't really think about it, but it is a very different kind of challenge.
Mm-hmm. With this one, I kept wanting to make it sound a little more polished and not quite as gruff, because I'm like, I thought it would be grating on people's ears to constantly have that gravelly voice. And so those were some of the notes I got back. They're like, hey, you're losing a little bit of that Jameson voice. So once I tried to do it fully with that gruff tone, it seemed to work. That seems to be a thing, I think, with doing songs as a character. Is I tried to focus so much on trying to sound technically correct, but really the important thing is to be in character and perform, to get the essence of that character, and get the emotions across much more so than trying to make a polished sounding vocal performance.
Mhm.
It's one nice thing with musicals is usually it's acting over perfect singing.
Yeah.
If you can do both, it's even better, but the emotion has to come through, I think, more so than anything.
Yeah, I guess with musicals also, there's probably a bit more forgiveness when it comes to kind of sing talking, because a lot of musicals are just kind of singing dialogue a little bit. So
Mm-hmm.
you might be able to get away with using a bit more of a talking voice in a musical, possibly, than on an album, for example.
Right, right. And I know there are also people that are, extremely critical, and they want the singers in the musicals to be perfect, and they criticize the film version versus the original cast, and uh, and I can kind of get that if they're really those kind of technical purists. But for my own personal opinion, I obviously love an amazing singer, and it depends on the show and the song as well. Uh, just what sort of mood and tone it should have. But yeah, usually I've always leaned more towards a really engaging performance, even if it's not quite as smooth and as polished as a better singer may do.
So much just cool geeky stuff out there. All sorts of stuff. We got musicals, we got WWE, we got sci-fi, fantasy, steampunk.
Yep. And it's like I've always felt weird, or for a long time felt weird considering myself a geek, because I've never been exactly into all of the typical geeky things. You know, I wasn't really big into fantasy or a lot of sci-fi. I do like Star Trek and some, but I hadn't seen much of Star Wars, never really got into it. I like Star Wars, but never. So I always felt like, well, I can't really consider myself a geek because I don't like this, that, or, you know, I haven't played D&D. But at the same time, I think we're people are kind of realizing that you know, geeks can really apply to, I think, any kind of hardcore love of whatever you're a fan of. You know, whatever if it's a show or a game or, you know, movies or music. You can be a huge music nerd. You can be I've always thought it was funny when people that were considered like cool and not nerdy, that were really, really into sports, uh, viewed that as being less nerdy than being really into Star Wars. Because I've got plenty of friends that are huge, huge Star Wars fans, have massive collections of figures and all sorts of things. And that's what they're really into. That's their, you know, geekdom. But then, like, my father-in-law, this is not to make fun of him, but he like, you know, he's never been into that kind of stuff, but he is a huge Pittsburgh Steelers fan, you know, football team, and has an entire room filled with memorabilia and action figures and all sorts of things. And when you look at the two of them, they look equally geeky. They're just in different genres.
It's so true. So true. You would be very hard pressed to call my dad a geek, but there's very geeky aspects to some of the stuff that he's into. Like,
Oh yeah. And just
and
like, you know, fans will go to conventions or you know, get together to go to a, you know, a midnight screening of a movie, or at least I don't know if they do with midnight anymore, but you know, get together and make big events out of these things. They do the same thing whenever there's a football game on. They make it a big event, and it's, you know, just the same kind of diehard fandom. Just, you know, they're just fans of something else.
yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Maybe geeks are just fans who've just the what qualifies as geeky is maybe expanding now. But it brings to
Mm-hmm.
mind this old web comic that used to exist. I think the woman who drew it has maybe gone on to bigger and better professional things, and but she used to have this comic called Manly Guys Doing Manly Things, and it was kind of based off of all of the manliest characters from mostly video games, but kind of media in general. Um, and it was just this weird concept of how they all work at a temp agency to rehabilitate these really manly guys back into society. But one of the comics was drawing attention to, I think, Duke Nukem. And she was making the point that, like, Duke Nukem was considered this really, really manly guy. But Duke Nukem was originally made like really early on in video gaming. So all of the dudes who wrote all of his lines were hardcore nerds. So all of Duke Nukem's lines are really just like these dorky references. And she manages to draw attention to this in some strange comedic sort of way that I completely don't remember. But it was just kind of drawing attention to this fact that everyone was like, yeah, Duke Nukem, like super manly. But if you actually look at his dialogue, Duke Nukem was just a big nerd. Like, he's just quoting like old movies and stuff all the time. You put
Yep.
that guy in the real world, that's a nerd.
Yep. I think we're kind of, I guess, as a society, in some ways, changing our views of maybe even what like a geek or nerd is, because it feels like for me, growing up late 80s, early 90s, you went based off of what pop culture said, was geeky or nerdy. You had movies showing like in high school, the jocks, the people that were into sports and cars and those sorts of things. Those were considered cool things. People that were into D&D, sci-fi, or whatever, those were looked down upon as being less than or stupid. And they were also, obviously stereotypes. That it was like someone who's a manly man and who's into this sort of thing falls into like this entire group of people, and someone that's into something like Star Wars or something nerdy, like all nerds were viewed as being the same type of person. And more it's more apparent like, well, no, everybody's got a wide variety of things they like and don't like, and everybody is a unique individual, and there are plenty of people that have similar interests, but you can't put everybody into one specific category. So I feel like a term like geek these days can more be applied to just being a fan of something as opposed to a negative thing or a derogatory term, which, I mean, it kind of hasn't been for a while now. It's been more celebrated, but I don't know. That's just kind of my thought on it right now.
Yeah, then I think kind of as people get a little bit more tolerant of each other and more accepting of each other's quirks, then it's, I think people are finding the jocks and the mean kids to be less impressive these days, and maybe the cool kids aren't necessarily the ones who beat up other kids or stuff like that. Maybe the cool kids are now the nice kids, or you would hope, at least. I don't know. I'm old now, so
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what goes on in school, but
And the same way too, a lot of people that are nerds that want to retaliate. Basically, what I'm saying is, bullying people online, or yeah. But I guess by that same token, there can be people that are within the geek community that can also be negative or mean.
mm,
So it's the man. I'm like having trouble formulating the words, but basically what I'm trying to say is people should just try to be nice to everyone.
mm. It is.
Don't try to feel like you're better than someone else because you are doing better at one thing or another, or you're trying to be nicer. If everyone could just kind of treat each other with respect and dignity, that would make everything a lot easier. Which now it sounds like the most boring generic statement, but I guess more and more thinking about just the fact that not trying to label all people as one type of something just from what sort of fandom or what sort of thing they're into, but try to humanize people a little bit more, and see them as not just a one-dimensional thing.
Yeah, it's less cool these days to look at someone and be like, "Oh, you're a Trekkie, eh?"
Yep.
Incidentally, on that note, Star Trek: The Next Generation just showed up on Netflix in Finland, so I started watching it. That show was
Awesome.
not what I was expecting.
Are you enjoying it? I grew up on it, and it has always been my favorite Star Trek.
I'm really enjoying the characters so far. Like Captain Picard almost has a Disney princess vibe to me. He's just such a good person. But yeah, I like the characters. The storytelling has been questionable. Uh, Like at best it doesn't make sense, but I believe what episode 3 of The Next Generation was like the worst rated episode of Star Trek ever. So coming into this now is like fully, like, of course I know all of the pop culture references to Star Trek and all
Yeah.
of that, and
And
I
the first
recognize all the
season is
characters.
the roughest.
Yeah, it seems to be what it, Code of Honor, I think, was the name of the episode that everyone said was real questionable on the racism note, and I think I was reading
I don't
something
remember it
about,
very well, but
and Patrick Stewart had said like all of the actors from that episode felt really quite embarrassed about it in hindsight. But it's something to do with this, like, I think the original plot for the episode was supposed to be about like a, a reptilian race who had a kind of Bushido sort of culture to them. But it just kind of ended up with this 1940s tribal Africa, like very like questionable with the portrayal of just all black people in this race. And
Yeah.
I think like one of the guys writing the episode was like fired halfway through the production or something because it
Yikes.
was yeah, that kind of episode. But I I understand now that okay, that's about as bad as Star Trek's gonna get, so it can only go up from here.
Yeah, and the characters I think in Next Gen are fantastic. That's probably one of the best things. Is it's such a solid cast and just a great bunch of really fun characters. Um, I think as with almost any show, there are going to be things that don't age well. And sometimes things that may have been written with the right intent weren't executed the right way. But yeah,
A common
but yeah,
fault
for
of the
sure. I
90s.
think yeah. Yeah. In fact, I think season 1 was like maybe even late 80s. So it's
Yeah. The sets look surprisingly 80s for the 90s, I found. So maybe that's part of it. But I do find it does seem to be like all questionable episodes aside, like overall the morals and everything seem to be quite progressive. You know, they've got the woman as the security officer, they've got people of different color and everything in the cast. So like for its time actually seems quite progressive. And
oh
I
yeah.
like the idea already that the nerds back in the 90s or whatever writing this were like, yeah, no, this is what being progressive looks like we like women and black people and all of that. So it's always
Yeah,
nice
and
to also look back and see that.
yeah. So you also yeah, do you remember the time that these were made? Even like the original series was made in the late 60s,
Mm.
and for that time having characters of different races and having women in, some of these positions was even more progressive at that time. uh Star Trek had the first ever interracial kiss on television. It broke a lot of ground.
Yeah, I was
But yeah,
thinking that didn't William Shatner have the first interracial kiss, and I wasn't even sure if I remembered there being something that they had kind of done it in defiance of someone somewhere in the production line that didn't think that that was
probably.
appropriate and they just kind of did it anyways or something along those lines.
Yeah.
I'm not
So I think
completely
that's
sure.
always been sort of a little bit of a part of Gene Roddenberry's vision with Star Trek,
Mm. It's
trying to
nice to see.
trying to envision a better future, I guess was.
Yeah. I do really kind of enjoy the show for what it is of just seeing like we're gonna throw these guys into this situation. Try not to be generic humans about you how you deal with it, and just see how the writers get creative at solving this problem. Okay, so far it's still mostly just kind of nonsense, but as I've been told, season 3 is where it starts to get really good. So I'm looking forward to season 3.
Yeah, we haven't finished it yet. My wife and I recently were binging it, and I think we may be in season 4, 5, maybe. I don't remember how many seasons there are, but I need to get back to it because we've been enjoying it in the past year or so.
Do you have a favorite of all of the sci-fi series? Because, as I said, fantasy has maybe not quite such a good track record for good releases, but sci-fi, there's honestly quite a good selection out there. So, what have been some of the best ones or the most memorable ones that you've seen?
I haven't seen a lot. I mean, Star Trek has always been one that I liked because I used to watch that with my mom all the time uh, as a kid, and I always liked it. I really enjoyed Firefly. I wish there was more Firefly.
Like everyone.
Outside of that, yes. I've always been much more of a comedy fan. That was something, even as a kid, I wanted to be a comedic actor. I wanted to make comedy films, so comedies were always the things that drew me. So in the 90s, I watched a lot of things with Robin Williams and Jim Carrey and those sorts of things. So a lot of the shows that I've been a fan of, even in recent years, have been sitcoms. So I was a big fan of The Office, Parks and Recreation. Right now we're rewatching Brooklyn Nine-Nine. But yeah, I've always been a big fan of comedies. So I said
No,
I'm not necessarily your typical geek, but I like a lot of different things, and I'm into the things I like.
hey, that's always good for me, for anyone to chat with, because either you're talking about stuff that I like, and that's great, or you're teaching me about something new, and that's also great. So I win either way. But I think I've said, like, there's very little that I've not touched in the surface of things that geeky people like. And I think I maybe said LARPing was the one thing I haven't done, but I guess technically that's incorrect, because we had a streak for one of my friend groups that when we all of us turned 30, we started making kind of basically LARPs for each other that we would send everyone on a birthday quest. So unfortunately, I was one of the early birthdays, so this didn't happen for me, but we had come up with some quite elaborate shenanigans for some of our friends, like making one of them go around. He still lives very close to where he grew up, so we had him go around gathering people into his party to go clear ghosts out of our friend's house. But the ghosts were all custom bit monsters and represented by really weird drinks that he had to drink to defeat the monster. And we even had one of those like ruby emerald weapon kind of uber special secret bosses hidden in the basement. And we did a weird ritual where a bunch of people poured drinks, and it's a horrible drink that we used to have in the young drinking days that's just 5 different shots and half a cider and half a long drink and some black currant juice, so it just tastes like juice, but it's like just a horrible thing. It's the only drink you'll need in one night. So that functioned as the final boss, or the hidden boss. And then the final boss was the narrator of the whole event, who um, gave him a chili pepper eating contest, and then brought out the final form, which was a hamburger made of all of the chilies that he had just eaten. And then we all of his party members had our power sapped, so he had to eat the burger by himself. And so I guess technically I could say that I've done some LARPing, even if it was just birthday shenanigans. But for
Nice.
30-year-old geeks, that was honestly really fun.
That sounds cool. I have not done any LARPing yet, so at least you have. It's another thing you have up on me.
I suppose the like proper reenactments is kind of a geeky thing, I suppose, and I've never done anything like that. I've never. I know that I think the European School of Swordsmanship has some places here. I think even they maybe were not far from where I used to live when I didn't live in the middle of nowhere. Because every once in a while I'd go for a walk on a Tuesday evening and find a bunch of people sword fighting in the park, and I was always like, why am I not a part of this? But I never knew where they were coming from.
That's pretty cool. I recently had to get reenactors insurance, even though I'm not involved in any reenactments, because some of these Ren fairs that were hiring me as a musical performer just required all of their performers to have reenactors insurance, which or some form of insurance, but they mostly cover people that handle firearms or fire or any sort of dangerous stunt work in reenactment, but they also included steampunk in there recently now. So I've managed to get this insurance just in case, but it's like all I'm doing is playing guitar. But But
That's
I have
honestly
reenactors insurance
interesting.
should I ever need to do something like that.
That's not a thing that I knew existed, and
I
that's
didn't
really
either until I had to get it for this event.
because I like to go to some hippie festivals every once in a while, and if there's one thing hippies love, it's fire dancers. So
Mm.
you'd think that maybe like fire dancers would probably need some sort of insurance. You would think it's probably pretty good risk of burning yourself as a fire dancer.
Yeah, it would be good to have insurance.
But yeah, no, I've never thought, that must be a thing that some people need. Interesting.
Mm.
There's got to be just so much strange stuff that goes on behind the scenes and all sorts of stuff that's just
Mm.
really interesting if only you have the opportunity to experience it.
Absolutely. I've continued to find new things just in the experience of being in this band and performing at different events and seeing the different like sideshow performers or people that do all sorts of different things. I always wonder, like, how do they get into something like that? Because I could never do some of these extreme things physically that seem extremely dangerous or painful, and it always amazes me that some people can do some of these acts where they're putting hooks in their bodies or all sorts of these types of things. And like I prefer to be comfortable. I just like to get up and entertain with music.
Mm. Yeah, that's kind of a bit on the same lines as me, although I do beg the excuse of having very bad bones. So my
Mm.
bones don't like me. I maybe headbanged a little too hard in a bar in Germany one time back in my drinking days and gave myself a bit of whiplash that's been haunting me ever since. So, oops.
Oh man.
Listen to your mom when she tells you not to headbang. It's very important to use circular motions. Back and forth is just a health risk. don't do it.
Of course, now I'm getting close to 40 and just sleeping the wrong way, my neck will be killing me.
Yep. I was just visiting my osteopath yesterday to just kind of put everything back where it's supposed to be. I just need to go in. Like, I'm basically a fleshy robot that needs to go in for maintenance every 2 to 4 weeks. So
So you're
I'm looking.
essentially a steampunk character.
Ooh, ideally. Although I don't have any plates in me, unfortunately. And surprisingly resilient
Not
bones my
yet.
entire life. They're shifty. They don't like to stay where they belong, but they're durable. They don't break. Well, how are we feeling? We've been going for about 2 hours and 10 minutes. Are we running out of topics? I can probably go all day if I need to, but how are you
Oh yeah,
feeling?
I'm just kind of sitting here letting you take the lead and ask questions. So
Oh, I'm trying to think. Are there any subjects that we were talking about that I've missed or forgotten? Or was there anything I wanted to ask that I've forgotten? Always, but
and I usually forget things. I can think of things. I probably wrote things in that email that I've already forgotten. So
I guess one thing that I was still kind of curious about was when it comes to storytelling in music. Like, of course, like as you said, like nowadays you're not so strictly limited to the steampunk themes, and I love that. Was it the most recent single? The world outside is going to be the death of me. Apart from the fact that I got really annoyed because it got very badly stuck in my head for 3 weeks, and I was starting to be like, "Stop! Stop! 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 Out! Play something else." But generally
that's good though.
speaking,
That
when you're
means that's I consider that I consider that a success. If someone can't get the song out of their head.
yeah, too catchy, very catchy. There's a phrase that they have in Finnish called an earworm when something just
Mm-hmm.
goes in and then doesn't come out. And this is the definition of earworm, just do 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 do. Ah! Beyond that,
Yeah,
really great.
that was definitely the biggest departure from steampunk. Which is it's not something I'm gonna be like doing. I'm not just suddenly going to abandon steampunk or do uh, unrelated stuff, but here and there, I think I'm gonna try to occasionally write based on an inspiration. Like if it's even if it's not a steampunk theme, if it's something I feel enough of a motivation to write, I'll probably go ahead and do that just because um I feel like at this point after doing so much steampunk stuff, I still want to do it, but I don't want to necessarily limit my creativity if I have another idea. And like that one I felt like specifically was just based on the way I was feeling and kind of wanted to make a song about it, and was like, I think enough people can relate to this that I might as well put it out there, even though it's not steampunk. It, it won't get the kind of attention that a steampunk song might, but the people that are the fans that like to listen to everything probably would appreciate it. So I'll continue doing a mix of different stuff, but still keeping the focus on steampunk as much as possible.
Yeah, that's perfect. That brings me back around to kind of what I was getting to there, which, the train of thought likes to go off. But, um, like, what sorts of things do you draw your inspirations from regarding the storytelling? Because even if you just take, like, Burn It Down, such a ridiculous concept of just everyone loses, huzzah! Like, so where do you kind of get the ideas for these random stories?
I guess lots of different places. Yeah, with that one, I think Burn It Down. I think that the idea behind that was just kind of showing both sides were wrong. Both sides were doing things the wrong way, and it ended up not really. So it's like sometimes everyone is wrong to some degree. uh, yeah, sometimes I will have an idea just based on maybe a concept or a topic that I've wanted to do for a while. Um, there's a song on the third album called Tin Man, and I had the idea years ago, but it took until the third album to finally figure out what I wanted to do with it. And so that's a very like 1950s like love ballad style song, a little bit of a doo-wop influence, um, based on the Tin Man from Wizard of Oz. So I guess drawing from literature as well. There's a song called "My Man Frank," which will be on the upcoming album. It was released as a single a couple of years ago, um, and it's, I guess, sort of told from the perspective of Dr. Frankenstein. Um, but it's similar to The World Outside. It's a very like upbeat, cheerful song, but I don't know if you've heard it or not, but it's basically like saying like everybody's trying to attack my buddy Frank, but he doesn't mean any harm. Kind of that's I don't even know where all of these ideas come from other than whatever I see that influences me, if that makes sense. Sometimes I'll try to think of something and make it fit within the steampunk genre, like Frankenstein or Wizard of Oz. Other times it'll be a completely random original thing. I think when you mentioned Can You Help Me? Uh, that one was, I think, one that I just came up with the music first and wanted to write something. And sometimes I will just start coming up with lyrics or trying to just start writing and see what happens. And I think that's the way that one came together. Was I just started writing. I was like, okay, when I had the line "bleeding out on these steamy city streets," then I'm like, okay, well, where is this going? Why is this guy bleeding? What's he trying to accomplish? Why is he injured? So sometimes it'll just be like that, just figuring it out as I go. And then other times I'll have a very clear idea. Like AI Stole My Life. I like immediately, when this idea came to my mind, I'm like, okay, yeah, I know exactly the story I want to tell with this, somebody who had it all and lost everything when AI took his job and his livelihood. And that probably came so quickly because I think that's just something that a lot of people are thinking about and concerned about. And it was a way that I could relate, but also apply to a steampunk thing within, I guess, being a steampunk musician. And stop me if I'm rambling too much, but
Oh no, as I
yeah, I
said,
don't
I
I don't have
love this.
a perfect answer for that, but inspiration comes from lots of different places.
Oh yeah, no, it makes sense that uh, when I was younger and writing more fantasy, I think like probably a lot of the part of why I haven't published anything is that back in the day when I was learning to write, my ideas were too big and I didn't know how to contain an idea into something like simple enough that it could be a short story or something like that. So all of my ideas were these grand massive things, even if conceptually they weren't that big of a thing. Just they all had to be interconnected and all sorts of stuff. And I would just the smallest little things would just twinkle by and just spark into something insane after just some random thought, or you see a funny looking flower or something weird, just you hear a sound that you've never heard before. And the younger you are, everything is new and exciting all the time, so
Mm-hmm.
everything just sparking inspiration all the time, and you come up with really weird and interesting things. And I think I've mentioned in past episodes that one time I, like in the last few years, did a reread of one of it was the first original story I ever wrote, and I turned on the comments, and I just, as I was reading, anytime I saw something that I had ripped off from something else, I'd just comment what that was. Was it Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or something? And I was surprised at what I found because, like kind of like you said, I was never a big fan of Star Wars. I thought they were fun movies, but as I said, I was more of a swords and sorcery than a lasers and spaceships kid. So I was surprised at how much Star Wars influence was in there, or the sheer magnitude of Final Fantasy that I ripped off as well. It was probably 3 times what I had thought it was going to be. So it was always just like that dump of input and then see what kind of sparks something new to create output.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that because that movie that we made, Flashback, took 9 years to make because it was such a huge idea. And when we look back at it, we have no idea why we attempted something so massive as our first project ever. Because it's a full length movie shot entirely on blue screen with all CG backgrounds that we had to do ourselves, even though we had no experience in 3D animation. It was really a really small team, mostly just 3 people with a few other friends that came in and helped out quite a lot. Um, so I don't know why, just like 3 guys right out of high school decided to try to make a extremely high special effects film on a massive scale with no budget and no experience. But that was that young, naive, just excitement of, oh, we want to make the ultimate movie. If we're going to make this and we're going to really commit to making a project, let's make it as big as we possibly can. Was that this is the ultimate dream project. If we make one movie in our lives, let's go all in. And now that we've been through that, we learned so much through doing it, and we apply all of those skills in our day-to-day work now. But now it's like we're doing smaller videos for YouTube, and I used to want to do like massive concept albums, and I would still love to do something like that. But it's harder to find the time, and I have to be a little more practical now. So now if I have a big idea, it's usually for a song, and it's still something in the end that's a little bit smaller. But yeah, when you're younger, I think especially, like, it's hard to contain, and your ideas are so huge and so ambitious.
It's very true. And I think I have a weird situation where I've, I'm the artist with the artist spirit, but still no one really knows who I am. So I have this kind of freedom to make myself into whatever I want to be, but I still have that, like, I haven't somehow outgrown this childlike tendency to dream way too big with things sometimes. So even if in my writing, okay, I've finally calmed things down enough that I can write a story about a dead guy and a psychopomp after the end of the multiverse, when there's no more afterlife for this guy to be ferried to. What happens? And I can do that in the contained space of a handful of pages without having to tell the entire history of the multiverse before it collapsed and like all sorts of things like that. So that's a story you can find on my website. It's called Adrift, and it's about these two guys just kind of figuring out what the hell after everything that has ever existed just gets put in a blender and spit back out.
Yeah.
But
And I'm sure that's one thing too with I guess just age and experience, figuring out how to be a little more concise with things and get the main points across without overly being elaborate. That's something that yeah, even now it's like I learned how to make a movie in that way and do special effects and blue screen and green screen work. So I know how to do those things, but now I have to be a lot more selective with my time. Like the video for Weird is one of the first ones I've done in quite a while that was live action and shot on green screen. But it was something that I knew I would be able to complete within 2 to 3 weeks. So I'm like, okay, I can focus that much time or commit that much time without interfering with all my other work. That was the other thing. When I was, working on Flashback, I didn't have any other obligations or priorities. That was the main focus. And it's like, well, now I'm an adult. Now I've got bills to pay and I've got to manage my time and I've got responsibilities. So now I have to think a little bit more grown up about this. And even though I have the ability to pull off a bigger project or a bigger music video, can I afford to commit that much time to it? and is it going to be worth it in the end? That's another thing, having to think like, is this going to be financially worth doing? Which I hate doing as an artist because I never want to think about that. I just want to make the vision that I have in my head. But if it's something that's going to take too much time, it might be a financial risk because then you're not going to get your other work done and you're not going to be able to get your bills paid on time.
yeah.
The joys of having to grow up. But
That's when
I'm
our
still
dreams get reined in.
Yep. I'm still extremely fortunate and grateful to still be able to have this and do this as a job, and actually still do the things that I love and am passionate about and make a living doing it, even if I do have to be a little bit more financially responsible, even though that's not necessarily one of my strong suits because I'm way more the creative minded than the business minded, but gotta find that balance so I can still do this as a profession and not just a hobby.
Yes. Yes, my other critical downfalling is just being completely incapable of promoting myself. So
I hear you.
but we've been at this for quite a long time, so sort of to wrap things up, is there anything, I know we've touched on this a bit already, but is there anything that you're working on right now that you want to shout out that people should keep an eye open for in the coming future?
The primary thing I'm trying to get finished is the next Cog Is Dead album, which I still have a few more songs to write. I've already released quite a few singles over the past, I guess, 3 years. And all of the original songs, not the covers. The cover songs get their own like compilation albums that I release, but the original songs are all going to be on the next album. And I'm working on some collaborations with a few other steampunk musicians, or at least musicians within the same musical circle that I've had a chance to perform with, or get airplay on some of the same steampunk radio and things like that. Some of them are artists that I have worked with and performed with before, and then there's also ones that I haven't that I'm excited to get a chance to work with for the first time. I'm not mentioning anything just yet because nothing's been officially announced, so I'll wait until it's closer to announcing who's been involved in it. But I'm very excited to get another full-length studio album released. It'll be the first one since 2018, I think. Can't believe it's been that long already. I've been very busy. I've been releasing a new song every single month, whether it's an original or a cover, on Patreon. And I've been releasing most of those as wide release singles as well. But there are some that still are only on Patreon that haven't had a chance to be released. But I'm constantly busy. So if anyone would like to sign up and support the Cog Is Dead on Patreon, every month you get a new track and you get to hear it before it's released to the public. And it helps just support the music so that I can keep doing this full time and keep making more music, which is something I'm extremely passionate about, if you couldn't tell. But anyway, I guess that's about all I can think of off the top of my head as far as a big project that I'm working on. Is there will be another Cog Is Dead album coming soon. More than likely, it'll be sometime next year. I'm hoping earlier in the year, but it'll just depend on my schedule and getting it done. If it was up to me, I would have been working a lot more on these songs already over the past few months, but other work and voiceover and client jobs keep popping up. Excuse me.
Yeah, no, that is the life of the artist, I suppose, that you're constantly in the juggling act of different projects. So,
Yep.
well, then I guess my last question is, do you have anything you just feel like shouting out? Something you think is cool and geeky that you think people should check out if they haven't seen it already?
Uh, now I'm trying to think of it's something geeky, but I don't know.
It doesn't have to be
At the
geeky.
moment, I'm watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which I mentioned. It's another ridiculous comedy series, but really enjoying that. I've seen most of it already. Haven't seen the final season yet. That's not anything even that's currently airing, so I don't. I really enjoyed Weird, the Al Yankovic story that came out last year. I'm a huge Weird Al fan. I've got my Weird Al action figure here in the studio.
Magnificent.
I always credit Weird Al as being my biggest musical influence. So anyway, that movie, since I'm a fan of Weird Al and I'm a fan of parodies, and the entire film is sort of a parody of music biopics. It's a really fun film to watch, and I don't know if you had a chance to see it, but it's pretty ridiculous and definitely strays very, very far from the truth in hilarious ways.
Amazing. That does sound like fun. I'll have to check that out.
I intentionally released my song Weird on the same day as the movie Weird, the Al Yankovic story, partly because I was such a huge fan of his. And then when I had the idea to do the song Weird and release it on the same day, that gave me enough motivation to be like, all right, forget it. I'm going to make that the goal, and that'll be the release date. So I'm going to make sure I get this song and video done on time. Sometimes it takes just weird little things like that, deadlines, or just some random motivation to make like give me the motivation I need to actually tackle a bigger project instead of just going, that's too much work.
But also a similar thing to how my brain works is if there's some sort of a deadline, even if it's made up, as long as it means something to me, then I don't procrastinate. But if I don't have a deadline, it's very hard to finish anything.
Absolutely.
Interesting. The more artists I talk to, the more of these things start to, oh, this isn't just me. Okay. I'm maybe just struggling with it more than everyone else. So that's always a little heartwarming to know that I'm, even if I am my own worst enemy, it's not just me. Other people go through this too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we realize we're all weird, or maybe we're not as weird as we thought.
Either way, being weird is great.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. We've been going for over 2.5 hours now, so I should probably let you get back to your day so you can continue writing music or whatever it is you had planned for the day. But yes, thank you again so much for doing this. This has been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on here. I've really enjoyed just chatting about stuff that I like and hearing about your own experiences and your creative process. So this has been a lot of fun. Thanks.
Purpose fulfilled. Huzzah. And thanks to anyone watching, and stay geeky.